So we're going to start our panel. In round one, we're going to have the panel Challenges and Opportunities with the moderator, Claudio Semeia, Director of Program, and General Coordinator of MBA, PPP, and Concessions. In round two, we're going to have the panel Partnership for the Planet, PPPs in Environment Manager. The coordinator is going to be Ricardo Silva, Senior Operators at the IBD. And we also have another session on digital infrastructure in Latin America and the Caribbean. Gonzalo Arauz is the moderator, and he's leader in investments, technology, media, and telecommunication of IDB. An excellent panel to all of you. We're kicking off the panel with Partnerships for the Planet in Environmental Management. In this panel, we will see that the benefits can be extended to environmental preservation. And this is what our guests are going to demonstrate. We're going to have 4 panelists. We have Fernando Pieroni from the Semeia Institute, Camila Lima from BNDES, Roberta Buendia from the São Paulo State Government, and Pádua from Parquetur. We're going to start with Fernando Pieroni. Fernando has had different leadership positions in the public sector and private initiative. He's worked with different infrastructure sectors, and since 2016, he's worked in the third sector as president of the Semeia Institute, which is dedicated to the promotion of partnership for environmental asset management. Fernando, you have worked in most park concession programs. Based on this experience, and with a systemic view of the sector, what would you like to highlight in terms of advances and lessons learned in the country? Well, Ricardo, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the invitation and congratulate IDB for this event. What we've seen in the country in the last few years is that there has been a significant improvement of the partnership agenda for the management of parks. Just for you to have an idea, park concession in Brazil started in the late 90s. For 20 years, we had 4 parks that used this type of instrument. And then in the past 3 years, we had 3 times more signing agreements for the management of these parks. So it has really grown a lot at a federal level, state level, and local level. We have it for natural parks, urban parks, different assets. We can also include zoos and botanical gardens. The São Paulo State has relevant experience in this area. We have attracted new investors, and the private market has included new agents, Claudio from Pacto with these new agents. So we can see an improvement, and this discussion we've had on ESG has led to a valuation of all of these assets. Retrospectively speaking and prospectively speaking as well, we see an even better scenario. We have over 70 parks being structured in the country to enable PPPs. So I wanted to highlight the size of what is going on. Number 2, the capacity of the different governments to structure different projects. Roberta is here with us. The state of São Paulo is pioneer. We have been able to develop all of the competences, and we see the National Development Bank coming in, sharing their knowledge with a large portfolio of projects. So what used to be isolated projects represents a robust pipeline for the future. We have challenges as well. One thing to be highlighted is that the ambition of public agents with partnership programs is perhaps beyond the current capacity to organize them. And that will be a challenge for future tender processes if we're not able to coordinate these initiatives well. The other thing is when we solve a problem upstream, we will have other problems downstream, and perhaps we're now overcoming these challenges in terms of structuring, but we have to think of how we're going to help our public agents to train, to build the capacity to deal with all of these projects. We need to have the public sector ready to turn this key, move on to the next step so that we can manage contracts. Another aspect is communication. As we advance, we can see there are areas in Brazil that are more or less sensitive. Engagement and understanding these projects as having a territorial nature and conceive a policy that will, in addition to requalify the space of the park, thinking of its best integration with the surrounding environment is essential for the success of these initiatives. The last aspect I wanted to mention is the diversity of models. We talk a lot about concessions based on the traditional models, based on the Law 8987, but there are other partnership modalities that can also include the third sector and other arrangements. These three aspects, building capacity for new models, among others, are very important going into the future. Thank you, Fernando. We're now going to turn over to Camila Lima. He works with social environmental infrastructure projects for IDB. Camila, in the last years, BNDES has positioned itself as a green bank in the projects it supports. The bank has strongly invested in park concessions and forests, and I would like to know if you could talk to us about the projects that the bank has developed along with the Brazilian forest system and IDB. Hello, Ricardo. Thank you for your question. Good afternoon, everyone. BNDES has a very important instrument for environmental protection and works along the Brazilian forest system. We are now structuring 8 projects, 3 in the south of Brazil, whose objectives are to restore the Atlantic forest, and others in the north of Brazil. These projects in the north are aimed at sustainable management, and they are in regions that have extensive forest areas, including logging and non-logging projects. I would also like to highlight that forest concessions are a reality now, despite all of the challenges. Today, we have 21 contracts that have been signed with private development of sustainable forest management. However, we still see that there are a lot more opportunities. These concessions are scattered in an area of 1 million hectares, but we can go beyond that. We truly believe that by supporting these activities involving new models, we will have an alignment between the public and private sector, and with that, we'll be able to leverage this instrument. In addition to economic feasibility of the project, There are economic possibilities. We have traceable logging, and we can also deal with the sustainable development goals at the same time. We will have a tender in the third quarter of next year, and we are all very engaged for the success of this project. And as Pieroni mentioned, we are aiming at the long-term success of these projects. We want them to be feasible and ready to adapt to all of the long-term changes we're bound to have. We want to be able to make good use of the potential of these forests, keeping in mind environmental protection, employment generation, to reach our desired outcomes.
Thank you, Camila. And now we'll talk to Roberta Buendia. She's an assistant at the State Agency for Infrastructure and the Environment, and they've been working with parks. Roberta, the São Paulo government pioneered the launch of PPP projects and park managements. As we've heard, you've been doing consistent work in launching new projects in this market. Could you share the experience of park concession experiences in the São Paulo government? Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here and share some of our story with you, which started in 2016 when a law was passed and we had a very successful strategy. So we thought of using parks through a use concession. Then in 2017, we thought, okay, how are we going to structure that project? And this was quite a challenge for a state agency for the environment that wasn't used to that kind of contract, to that kind of management, and to move away from dealing with end users and thinking strategically. So the challenge was to structure, model how to have legal certainty, and the state has huge experience in concessions. We learned a lot with the State Agency for Management, with concession programs. So we've learned a lot and started using with use concessions. So concessionaires can explore the parks for new activities. So we had the first structuring phase, the first pilot projects, and then after the first project, we reassessed, regrouped to start with the more recent lots of the past 2 years. So it's about continuous learning and trying to overcome that understanding that we're working with a market that only thinks about the end user. These are vastly experienced institutions, and we need to be in contact with our parks and green areas. So that's a very specific topic of structuring. Then we thought about parks, conservation units, and urban parks, the role they play, and how they are seen by the surrounding population, as we heard, and by users. So there are two challenges and two major communication channels. Users, who need to have a service and to be happy with that service, and they post that on social media. They call the ombudsman, and the auditors also have to be happy with the work that's being done. The third challenge was having a portfolio, to create a portfolio, coordination. As Fernando said, the market needs to keep up with the proposals, and when you get to the last mile, because we do have lots of hearing processes, consolidation process, proposal assessment. So when we get to the last mile to launch the call for tender, we need to make sure that we have bidders and that people will take part. With regards to the challenge, that's one point. As for the opportunities, parks and green areas have a huge potential to raise awareness about the environment, and we have reiterated that in our documents. And this is a fair agenda that will encourage people to have new experiences and to understand what our protected areas are about. So if we can raise awareness, I think we really can make sure that people will appreciate what we're doing. And there's also a huge challenge to create jobs in tourism, to acknowledge our cultural, social cultural assets, and employment. So those are the points I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Roberta. Now over to our next panelist, Claudio. He's a partner director at Parquetour. He's a professor at ESCAS IP. Claudio, you have a long track record of working in environmental management and park management. How do you think private park management can be an ally to public use and to improve environmental management? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hello to the other panelists, and thanks to the IDB for organizing this event. In my view, and I've been working in this field for years, I came to the conclusion that what's brought us here won't take us to a bright future, financially speaking. We're having an environmental crisis, a biodiversity crisis, among other crises, all of which have been created by humans. And they are a threat not only to humans, but also to the whole economic world. So a change is required. I started off my career as an entrepreneur in Rio. I have a degree in business management, and I was a businessman for years. And the last thing I did was to be the executive director at a pharmaceutical industry. When I left the office, I said, I'm never coming back. I'm going to devote my life to nature conservation in Brazil. So I created this research institute, IP, 30 years ago. And incredible as it may seem, 30 years later, I came to the conclusion that, and also reading papers by an authority on ecology, I said, if I didn't get involved in the world of business and economics, I wouldn't make a difference. So I decided to make a change on my journey. And that's how I got involved in business again. So I am B2B. I left business to go into conservation, and now I left conservation to go back into business. And when I was living in the nature universe, I lived in parks, and I could see some of the problems that park management incur in, especially when it comes to visitation and public use. The government has huge difficulties managing some parts of the economy, and that's one of them. And I was always amazed at it because the government bought a $400,000 tractor but couldn't buy the diesel to power the tractor. And the best solution for that, in my opinion, are public-private partnerships. So I made the most of that, and I created a company called Parquetour, which is a concessionaire in 2 parks, a federal park in the Chapada dos Veadeiros and a state park, the Serra do Mar State Park, with the team from the São Paulo State Agency. And it's an honor for me to be associated with these 2 parks through a concession. But the main people are the park managers. Parks are constantly under threat. The past 40 years I've been working in this field, I've seen park borders being threatened consistently. And I always say that closing the park won't save parks. You need to open parks. People need to be able to go in there and have a pleasurable experience in parks. They need to want more of that. That's key to the protection of biodiversity, and we'll only be able to have that if users go to parks, have a pleasant experience, which would be hard without a concession. Now that's made easier not only by concessions but also by PPPs. Maybe now we'll be able to delight people again to conserve parks because they are our biggest treasure. Thank you, Claudio. And now on to our next round of questions to our panelists. Let's talk about the challenges and opportunities of private participation in park management. There have been an increasing part in park management and forests here in Brazil. How can this intelligence be developed by the Semeia Institute be shared with colleagues in other governments across Latin America? Thank you, Ricardo. Well, the Semeia Institute is an impact agency. We are an NGO, we are a charitable institution, and an impact institution. As Claudio said, we were created to reconnect people with green areas, biodiversity, environmental assets, and we realized that we needed to bring people back to parks, and to do that, parks had to be managed, and for that to be done, we needed to support the public sector in their decision-making process, and that's how we went into PPPs as a way to provide instruments to the public sector so that they can do what they want to do with these instruments so that it can lead to conservation and economic and local development as well as welfare. I would imagine this challenge is not specific to Brazil. There's a huge potential for education because that is the reality of many governments that have assets to manage and parks to be implemented. So Semeia is not a park operator. That's not our intention. We work in strategic philanthropy. We try to make things happen and to make sure that all actors have the same strategic purpose to have an impact. So we have a great deal of knowledge. We try to create and disseminate knowledge and good practices to model these projects so that our parks can be better managed through good partnerships. We work with different governments, and so we know what different governments are learning, and we can suggest different instruments to different governments. So we are a communicating vessel among governments for these experiences. And this isn't just about parks. It applies to other sectors as well, but especially in parks, there is a risk that we can model a good project, technically speaking, and usually it's hard to take these projects forward because of the context surrounding them. So Semeia, in addition to making knowledge more systematic to provide advisory work with the government, we're also a platform for dialogue so that the private sector can explain to the government what its challenges are and to explain that concessions are not the sale of an asset and to try to understand the needs of society so that they can be included in the project modeling. And by doing that, hopefully, we'll be able to make these vectors point in the same direction, leading to the development of the sector. And I think all of that can be replicated. These are experiences from Brazil that can be rolled out to the rest of the region. Each country has its legal framework, its own specificities, but I think those are very small parts of the work. The largest part of this framework and this analysis can be replicated in other countries and governments. Thank you, Fernando. Next question is to Camila. Camila, forest concessions lead to heated debate. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges you see in advancing the forest concession agenda and how the work has been working in order to overcome those challenges?
Well, I think that the first thing to face this is by talking. We have been constantly discussing with different stakeholders, the civil society, with different partnerships. Semeia is one of them, DIP as well. And so it's important for us to listen. We have lessons learned from previous contacts, and this is the first important aspect. Another important aspect is that we want this market to grow significantly. To do this, we must have other good projects. We have strived to design models that can be applied in other forests in the future. And in this regard, I think that BNDES has tried its expertise with the system and also using it to develop projects in the sector. We can try different things out. The BNDES also plays an important role in funding projects. We have social environmental projects. We have tried to make the best use of our expertise in these projects. The challenges have to do with the investing market. There are different benefits. These projects are based on sustainability, economic, social, and environmental benefits. But the instrument is not very well known, and therefore we have tried to disseminate it inside and outside. We have tried to show how these models are developed and how the system works with the traceability of wood. And I think that the best way to support is by learning something which is done based on technical aspects. Thank you, Camila. I have a question for you. The state of São Paulo has implemented successful projects in the past few years. I wanted you to share with us what the challenges and opportunities that you identified and what is the future pathway for us to follow, in your opinion. In the last 5 years, and perhaps more intensively in the last 3 years, we have had a very nice agenda with parks, and I'm very happy with the proposals that we have been able to conclude this far. We now are operating with another project. The Botanical Garden is one of the assets. A week ago, we had a change in management, and we are about to sign contracts with Abatolofrin and Cantareira. And we're soon going to have the tender process for urban parks. These are different and complex assets, even though 2 years is not a very long time in terms of contracts. We have learned a lot in this time. The partnerships have been successful. We have achieved good results, support services, and the improvements and requalification of our areas. We have also been able to meet the objective as mentioned by Claudio and Fernando, so people can understand the dimension of work and feel like they had a good service and can take some good experience home, knowing that that preservation was meaningful for them. We have also tried to work with different aspects. For example, at the Serra do Mar region, we had some occupation in the park, and then we trained them on rendering services, and we are delivering the project right now. We had a housing requalification project. People were trained, and they are now trying to support the activities that are held there. The social aspect is also in place. It is something that we're trying to better disseminate. And the main challenge are the different control and monitoring mechanism. This was a new thing for our secretariat. We've worked hard so that our portfolio was standardized in terms of all of the contracts, taking into account profitability, but we also wanted to have a logical coherence in all of our contracts. Our challenge is to create control mechanism. From the very first project, along with the Semeia project, we determined an independent monitor. But to demystify privatization, we work with contracts on a daily basis involving public entities, monitoring systems, independent monitors, and all of the boards that participate. We have a consulting board. We raise awareness, and they help us develop our parks, and now along with our concessions as well. I want to make a comment. And this is something that we can see in different sectors. You talked about demystifying privatization. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about this. What are you doing to achieve this? One of our challenges, and this is something that we've tried to raise awareness on, long-term contracts is a challenge. People will say, 30 years is almost like a privatization. But it's not true. The area still belongs to the state, and we are constantly monitoring. We have to render accounts from time to time, and we also have satisfaction surveys. Our expectation now is to have a more specific monitoring system, including the users, and trying to talk to citizens, to those who have questions, because nowadays we use Instagram a lot and the different platforms, but we're trying to structure this more logical aspect of meeting the needs of the users. And of course, it's not a service as we usually see it, but we're trying to say, okay, we are paying attention. Did you have a good service? If you did not, then let's see what's wrong. But we're learning together. Thank you. Well, I want to ask the same question to Camila. Camila, the bank has concession projects in the south of Brazil and also in the Amazon region. The Amazon region, because of everything it represents to the rest of the world, is a passionate subject. So how are you dealing with this in terms of forest concession in the Amazon region, keeping in mind that the government is going to give the Amazon to the private initiative? So how do you deal with that? As you mentioned, communication is very important. When the community understands the benefits that are generated, everything becomes easier. As Roberta mentioned, we must pay attention to users, to the different communities, and also perceiving the benefits of forests and how concessions can contribute for that, and also how we can have access how the indigenous people can continue using the areas. It's very important to develop proper contracts, and then we have a process which will be good for them and they will be able to see the results.
Comunicação, muito escutar, né? Escutar, ver.
So it's important to talk, to listen to them, and have it very clear that we are not handing the forest over. We have a contract which is monitored for compliance the whole time. We have clear rules. And then, based on them, we receive benefits and have a virtuous circle for the protection of the forest and local development. Thank you, Camila. Claudio, I wanted to ask you something about innovations. Concessions and PPP projects are justified for many reasons. There are innovations that can take place. The Caminhos do Mar project brought about a series of innovations from the very beginning, and this was done by the government of the state of São Paulo. So I wanted to better understand how it works for you, including the academia, among other partners. I want to know how you are going to bring in innovations in these projects. Well, very good question, but I wanted to start my answer by saying that I'm always in contact with the Brazilian youth, and I receive about 10 emails every month from young executives saying they want to work with a mission in their life, not only for money. They want to have a mission. And environmental businesses have an extraordinary mission, but these young executives are not as connected to this area. I am part of the World Economic Forum. I got to meet innovating young executives. The name is Young Shapers, that's their name. And we have 25 global shapers. None of them work with Brazilian biodiversity, or at least until a month ago they didn't. And therefore, we need to have incentives. If we want to have innovation, there's a lot to do in the area of PPPs. They are already there. Basically, we work with concessions now, but we could be looking at other things. The legal framework, the Brazilian legal framework is an extraordinary source of possible partnerships for parks that are not part of the concessions nowadays, very small parks, but they need to have the same level of quality, and the quality will not come through the private initiatives, but through partnerships with the third sector. So we have not been paying attention to this enough. These young people will bring in innovation. There's an extraordinary group of young professionals in the Amazon. They are creating amazing startups. So what we're doing is to combine the environment to this case, and based on it, we use whatever we have in terms of legal framework, but including new ideas, new suggestions, because, as I mentioned before, we need to have a major change in the world, and that has to seriously take into account our climate conditions and biodiversity. Brazil already has innovating things. We have private reserves, but they have a public character. So we already have some innovation, but what we have to do is to work, include the academic world to foster the development of these innovations. And just to wrap up, the youth in the U.S. is looking at biodiversity with new technologies from a genetic point of view. Synthetic energy, for example, they are looking at biological laboratories. And we are still looking at technology, including electronics, which is also important, but we have a lot more to gain as a country if we look at our own biodiversity. It's a very inspiring future. It brings hope for a better future that will be developed based on these tools with the parks, not only the parks, but preservation of the environmental area in Brazil. We're moving towards the end of our session, and I would like to ask Camila for her final considerations. Well, I wanted to invite all of you to visit BNDES page on these projects to learn more about them, because we truly believe that they can make a difference for Brazil. As we mentioned before, they have an economic side to them, but they also comply with different sustainable development goals. I thank you for being here in this panel. Other panelists who shared examples of success stories. We truly believe in this agenda, and that with good projects we can contribute for environmental preservation and for a better future, using tools, important tools. And that's also part of the name of the panel, as you well commented. Roberta, your final consideration. Local development, development of tourism, social, cultural development, all. This is very important. It is nice with our overall objectives. We're all doing our own thing, but we're keeping in mind the preservation of the areas and trying to make this feasible. It is very gratifying. I thank my colleagues here, and I thank you for your participation. Thank you, Roberta. Claudio, your final comments. I wanted to thank you and invite those who visit national parks in Brazil, especially those that are part of the concessions. I want to invite you to visit them, and those in São Paulo state, please visit Caminhos do Mar. Caminhos do Mar is the old road that goes to the city of Santos. It's very near to our capital city. It has a very strong historical component. That is where Dom Pedro I went down to proclaim our independence from Portugal. I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. And also I wanted to make a brief report. After having worked in some traditional sectors with urban infrastructure, I decided to work with parks because I understood it was a challenge. I wanted to bring in the experience of other more advanced sectors to work with parks, and I thought there would be a lot more disagreement than what I saw. I see a lot of convergence. One thing that we have mentioned here today is that communication and the alignment of a purpose is key for us to move forward. And when I say alignment, I mean the public, the best people in the public arena, also our private sector, this communication with the society, environmentalists. I can see that this has helped this agenda to move forward. Of course, we've made errors. We have also done good things, but we have a very good perspective. Communication is important. Engaging is also very important. And this is the message I wanted to leave you with. Thank you, Fernando. The future of mankind is directly related to the preservation of nature, and therefore it's very important for us to take good care of it, keeping in mind all of the benefits. It is a challenge for mankind. We will only be able to face it together. Private initiative, public sector, and also the organized civil society. I thank our panelists, Roberta, Claudio, Fernando, Camila, and I close this session.
Obrigado. Obrigado a vocês. Obrigado.